Hey everyone. Back by popular demand, a dry ass asynchronous video walking you through our academic outcome data from the end of year I-Ready diagnostic. I want to name a few things from the beginning before I start walking through this data set. First, this is based on the I-Ready end of year assessment. So we'll do this again when we get NJSLA results. And one potential um, disconnect could be the I-Ready to NJSLA difference. So keep in mind this is probably a good projection of what's happening, but is not going to be perfect because there could be a disconnect between the two assessments. The other thing I'll say out of the gate is the intention here is to give kind of an executive level bird's eye view of how our schools are performing. This is not meant to serve as a replacement for diving into specific schools or specific grade levels or even specific items, which are all great additional moves. This is mainly just to give us headlines and potential focus areas. So with that, I'll dive into some of the data. I'll start with math, which are all of these first columns, and I'll start with columns C through F. These are the beginning of year I-Ready projections that I'm using as the baseline for the analysis. Column C is the percentage of students that would be proficient at the beginning of year with no more growth, essentially the number of kids who are already proficient, ranging from 0 to 4. The colors in the column, and this will be true for all columns, don't represent progress toward any goal. It represents a dispersion. So 0 in red is the lowest and 4 in green is the highest at the beginning of year. In column D, you'll see our projected proficiency if all of our students made stretch growth uh, based on BOY I-Ready projections. So at Spark, if every student made stretch growth that year or this year, they would have ended up at 36% proficiency. So columns C and D serve essentially as a range at the beginning of year that I-Ready was telling us what would happen if our kids learned nothing else, they'd be in the first column, and if they learned at typical stretch growth levels, they would be in the right column. E and F are the same type of thing, but for 2 plus below. So 96% of LSP students were 2 plus below at the beginning of the year if they did nothing else. And if everyone at LSP grew at stretch growth levels, they would have ended up at 35. Columns M and N are the end of year targets that were set in this goals and leading indicators doc, which you can click into. You'll see goals for proficiency and 2 plus below. The immediate first takeaway is that these goals for math were set too high. The beginning of year diagnostic was telling us, for example, that LSP would likely end up between 0 and 17. And even if we beat stretch growth targets that are set nationally, may have crept into the high teens. And our goal was set at 42%, which was too high. Um, S and T have our end of year actuals coming out of I-Ready. So this shows again a dispersion of proficiency. The most proficient school was at Cura with 28%, and least proficient was at Hatch with 9%. And the percentage of 2 plus below can be seen right here for end of year actuals and I-Ready as well. Columns W and X show the growth from the columns S and T to columns C and E. So it just says that, at life, 26% more students were proficient on math at end of year than beginning of year, 39% more or fewer in 2 plus below because they went from 90 to 51. Um, Columns Y and Z show our progress to our targets. So that's just calculating what we ended up at in our end of year actuals minus what our goal was. So we got to 12 at LSP. The goal was 42. That means we missed the target by 30%. I noted already that one of the key takeaways is that our goals, especially for elementary, but also for middle, were set too high for math. There was not a single school that met a math goal this year. And then the last column are the 60-30 goals. This shows how much kids were growing. We wanted 60% of our kids making typical growth. A lot of campuses hit it, and our overall average was at 60. The percentage of kids that met stretch growth, our goal was 30. We were close. We were at 27. So across this entire data set, I want to talk about the overall numbers. The overall number may be very slightly different than the number that comes back on our overall report because what I'm doing is actually using a weighted average assuming current enrollment numbers. So this kind of like assumes that every student at the campus took the test, which is not totally true. It's more like 98%. So just note that this is a very close but imperfect calculation. This says that at the beginning of the year, we were expecting 1 to 20% of our kids to be proficient. At the end of the year, we set goals for 37% to be proficient, but we ended up at 16. 16 was an improvement on last year because last year was 14%. Overall, we got 15% increase in proficiency this year from 1 to 16, and we reduced our number in 2 plus below by 28%. And then again, overall, end of year 60-30 growth goals were very close. Shifting over to ELA, this works a little bit differently because we don't use I-Ready for elementary school. So what's happening here is for elementary school, for data that I have, I've entered F&P percentages and growth based on, or F&P percentages. And then for middle, I still have the I-Ready data. The numbers at the top, though, are just taking middle school in this situation. So you have the ELA growth numbers and proficiency numbers, but they're not, I'm not using them to calculate the overall numbers. So let's focus on middle school. Looking at the beginning of the year, this is the percentage of kids who would be proficient with no more growth. There were a few schools that already were at 24%. Again, targets here were set very high. At NCP, for example, a proficiency target of 58. We're at 24 based on the I-Ready diagnostic. 58 was actually a good goal if every student met stretch growth. So these are the growth goals. Here's where we actually ended up. NCP was the highest at 46% proficient on ELA, Purpose at 44, ranging down to Hatch at 20, and the percentage of students that were 2 plus below are listed here. AW and AX showed the real growth in ELA. AY and AZ show the progress to target. This was the only place where we had a school meet a target that we set, which was Purpose. We set an end of year target for 43% of students to be proficient on ELA, and they got to 44. But again, goals probably set too high, although we were much closer at setting ELA targets than we were math. And then 60-30, again, 63% making typical growth and 29% making stretch growth. So very close to meeting our goals. Something I'll say about goals, you may ask, well, why would we want to reduce our goals? Would we be lowering the bar? And I actually don't think that's necessarily what I'm saying. I am saying, though, that if we're going to set goals at 60-30, and we think those are realistic and achievable based on national benchmarks, then we shouldn't be basically making those gains while then coming up short of all of our other gains. And next year, we're going to need to make sure we spend time thinking about what the appropriate end of year targets are, because our I-Ready projections are fairly accurate at predicting how our kids are going to do. The last section, which is the most important, is total points of learning. In column BE, I'm taking the, it's an addition of 4 data points, the percentage of kids that have increased in proficiency in either math or ELA, and the increase in proficiency and the reduction in 2 plus below in either math or ELA. So for middle school, this shows a dispersion, 95% total points of learning at Purpose to 55% at LSM. You can also see in these other 2 columns how much of that growth happened between beginning of year and middle of year, and then how much of it happened between middle of year and end of year. And this tells an interesting story because schools actually could go in either direction. At Justice, there was an acceleration in results towards the end of the year, and at Team, there was a deceleration in results towards the end of the year. Elementary school does the same thing, except it takes for ELA the F&P growth numbers. So that is just inherently not going to be as precise as the middle school numbers, but I still think is probably a good measure. You've got 81% total points of learning at Life, 16% at Thrive. Again, this is an addition of the reduction in 2 plus below on F&P, the increase in proficient on F&P, the reduction in 2 plus below on I-Ready Math, and the increase in percent proficient on I-Ready Math. So that gets you total points of learning. The next step for me is to correlate what we see here within bands with what our inputs are telling us. So and try to figure out whether things we were saying that were important actually drove the outcomes that we were hoping for. That's it for this video. Try to keep it under 10 minutes. Hopefully it was valuable. Thanks.